Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Writers Chat. It is so great to be with all of you every Tuesday. I feel so motivated and energized, and we've got a great chat already happening, kind of off camera, but we're so excited today to have a special guest here. So Johnny, my mom, it's weird to call her Johnny, but Johnny Alexander is one of my co-hosts, and she's off camera today, and Jean Wise, our other co-host, I believe is at a conference this morning, so we're missing her. And Melissa is on our Writers Chat team, and we love her so much. And so she's joining me today, along with our special guest, Annette Griffin. So Annette, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to go ahead, and I just want to share your bio because I think it's so perfect for our topic today, which is all about waiting and patience and publishing, which is hard. It's a hurry up and wait system. So I'm going to share your bio real quick, and then we're just going to jump right in. All right, so Annette Marie Griffin is an award-winning author who has managed and directed programs for children and youth for more than 20 years. She has written curriculum for character growth and development of elementary-age children, developed parent training seminars to benefit the community, and counseled at-risk youth. Her passion is to help children find home, and I love that. She and her husband have 5 children, 3 who have already flown the coop, and 2 adopted tweens still roosting at home, plus 2 adorable grands who add immeasurable joy and laughter to the whole flock. And today we're talking about, like I said, the waiting game. And Annette, let's just jump right in. We're going to turn this over to you, and I know we'll have a lot of discussion happening off camera and then on camera as well. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bethany, for having me. And I am so thrilled to be here to talk about one thing that I definitely, if I could be considered an expert in anything, it might be waiting. But I'm still learning. I'm a lifelong learner in that respect. But God has really shown me that waiting. Yeah, and I think I wrote this to you or said this to somebody. I never considered myself an impatient person until I entered into this writing to publish journey. And that's really funny because I think a lot of our weaknesses of the flesh, I think, aren't really brought out until they're put to the test. And in some respects, I think God has shown me a lot about waiting throughout my life history. And I think he does that. He's so faithful to do that. At different seasons of our lives, he'll teach us different lessons. And I think that he's added in a little, waiting one-on-one course throughout my whole, life. And now when I got to the writing to publish journey, it kind of advanced to that next step and that next class. And it's been challenging, but I can tell you that God has shown me so much through that process. And I think that it doesn't only apply to the writing journey, but it applies to life in general and God's plan for us because he's sovereign. And to him, it's not a wait, it's a purpose. And I love a quote that Oswald Chamber has. It's one of my favorite quotes ever. He says, prayer does not fit us for the greater work. It is the greater work. And that's how I feel about waiting. And waiting and prayer go hand in hand a lot of the time. I don't think that wait time is God preparing us for that greater work. I think he is doing that greater work while we wait and while we actively wait and do those things where he's showing us to do before the culmination of our hopes happen. And in this case, publication. And so, or, the next thing after publication, that next book or the next big thing, as our dreams are lived out, he gives us our dreams and then he prepares us for our dreams. And that end all be all goal is not a lot of the time the ones that we think they are. They're not his. His are the things that happen in between. And so I'm learning a lot through that.
Now, I love that you said that because, when you look back, sometimes you have to go through certain things before you are able to write about it or be the person that can share on it. And like if the book had come before those moments, it wouldn't have been what people needed it to be or what God needed it to be too, just talking in terms of books, but other areas of life too. I really love that.
Thank you. Well, I never started out. A lot of people have the testimony, and I've heard a lot of people speak about how they always wanted to be a published writer from the time they were little. And in kindergarten, they were writing these stories, and they have stories from middle school. That was not me. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed poetry, but I never aspired to be, you know, a published writer. God kind of planted that dream in me a little bit later in life. And it came with another kind of waiting that happens in our lives as well, is that we, you know, the word says, the Bible says that man can make their plans, but God's will prevail. And so as we're waiting for him to give us a little bit at a time, that dream that he has for us, he's taking us through lessons along the way that prepare us for that as well. And so my dream happened a little bit later in life, and God put a story on my heart. It was a novel. I think writers, we all have that story. You know, even when I'm mentoring and training young writers who have come to me, friends and family members who are young adults or younger come to me and say, oh, I want a book. Can you tell me? The first thing can you kind of help me with that? The first thing I ask them is, okay, what is the story in your heart right now? Because I think that it all starts with that. It all starts with that story in our heart that we have to get on paper. You don't have a choice about getting that story on paper. That has to come out. It's like a pregnancy. Like there's no stopping it. It's going to come, you know. And so God just kind of gave me a story and filled my mind and my heart with it. And I just put it on paper as I got it. And it's kind of like an allegory about Christ and his bride, which is us, the church. And so when I finally got that all out, my husband was seeing me do that, and I kind of explained to him, I just have to get this on paper. And he saw that dream there, and he decided, and he's not a spontaneous person, so I was very taken aback by this, but he, for Christmas that year, after a year of writing went by, he bought me a registration for a writers conference, which I didn't know anything about writers conferences. I'd never heard of writers conferences before, and it kind of intimidated me. I'm very much an introvert, like most writers are, and so the thought of going to a place with real writers and trying to learn, you know, and pass myself off as some kind of real writer was very intimidating to me. But I went, and it was a little bitty, and it was God's sovereignty that took him to find, I don't know how he found it, but it was in Alabama. We were living in Texas at the time. And it was a little retreat. It was a little writer's retreat. It wasn't a huge conference, which is really good for me because I think I would have been scared away had I started there. But it was a little retreat in Alabama. And, you know, I was just praying as I went, as I journeyed, you know, got ready to go, and then was on the plane going there. And I just asked God, you know, I don't know what you're trying to do. Please show me. If you want me to do something with this writing, you're going to have to show me, because that's just not what I'm all about. And he took me to that conference, and I have got to tell you, you know, one day I'll do a whole talk about just that story and about what God did during that time, during those 4 days. Oh my goodness. So little of it had to do with my writing journey, and so much of it had to do with a healing that had to take place in my heart before I could even embrace that dream that he had given me to write. And I mean, in miraculous ways. I mean, I cannot even tell you. He brought to that same conference a person from my childhood that I had to connect with, that I hadn't talked to in 20 years, that I had to connect with in order to have that healing become complete. And he placed that person right by my side at lunch that first day. It was just amazing. And so it just went on from there. So many people came into God just brought the people to me that I needed to connect with. And I didn't know I had been waiting all that time for that healing. I didn't know that I had been waiting for everything to happen before I could take that next step. But after that took place, he showed me that wait period in retrospect, and I was able to see it clearly from his perspective. And it was just amazing. And everything from that conference just kind of dominoed from there. And within a year of that conference, I had an agent. I had my first, book being looked at by a publisher, and I've been waiting ever since. And so it's like it took 20 years of wait before that for that dream to come into existence, and then now God's showing me each weight by weight his hand and everything. And so that's what's exciting to me is just seeing his hand at work through the wait.
And I know we've got a lot of people at levels of waiting right now. Some people are waiting for queries to come back, or maybe a book is with a publisher, or they're waiting for an agent to respond. Maybe some people aren't even at that stage. They're kind of waiting on themselves to get enough courage to send something. And it feels like right now with COVID, it's taking longer. So it's this thing. What tips and advice and what are some of the lessons that we can take away during these seasons of the waiting?
I think instead of focusing on the long wait, I'm learning. So I had no idea when I entered into this that I would have to wait after I sent an email for maybe like 2 or 3 weeks to get a response from anybody in the industry, because I didn't realize the whole inner workings of that and how busy everybody is, and how much time it takes to empty an inbox, but when you're on the other end of that inbox, it's excruciating because you don't know what's happening. Are they ignoring me? Did they hate it? Are they blowing me off? What's going on here? But when you learn that if you just take for granted that everything is going to take an incredibly long time, then you can kind of back yourself off a little bit and say, okay, God, what do you want to do with this time while I'm waiting? And that's where the treasure is found, right there, right in the middle of that. And don't get me wrong, I have not mastered this yet. It's still very hard for me to send off a proposal to a publisher and think, it's been like 6 months. How long does it take to decide that, but that's just the industry. And if you fight that, if you buck that, if you spend time lamenting about that, then you'll miss what's going on in between. And so the lessons that I have learned that are the most valuable is that the waiting time that we take is not a passive waiting time. Just like faith without works is dead, we can have faith and hope and confidence that what we have submitted is great and that God's going to use it and God's going to do his will with it. But in the meantime, there are things that we can and should be doing during that wait time to prepare for what God has for us. And so things like improving our craft, and things like making connections with other people, and things like, if we're talking strictly about the craft realm, apart from the spiritual realm, there are very practical things that we can and should be doing during those waits. We don't just send something to a publisher or an editor. We don't just send a query to an agent and then just twiddle our thumbs. There are things that we can and should be doing to make that time productive when the time does come for God to say, okay, now. And things like going to conferences, things like taking every advantage of the craft building opportunities you have, like through Serious Writer Academy and through other teachers and mentors, and then building relationships with people who've gone before you and people who are coming up behind you and people you're with, you're currently on that same road with. I think having joined a critique group through Word Weavers, I'm actually part of 2 online groups, a Kidlit group and a general. And those writers that I have come to know and love, and share my stories with, and have the opportunity and the privilege of hearing their, reading their manuscripts. Those are the people who I'm growing up with in the industry, and who knows what God has for them, you know, and it's exciting for me to be a part of that. And so that excitement and that hope that you can build in those in-between times are just as important as when something comes to fruition that you've been waiting for a really long time, like publication or that answer back from the publisher.
Yeah. I love that. And a lot of the marketing needs to happen in that in between time too. Like once you send it out, it's like, okay, let me keep going. And you had said something about, you know, not knowing what's going on the editor side or the publisher side, but you know, I just have heard I think we've all heard horror stories the more you go to conferences and make friends who are on the other side of that screen. And the quickest way to a rejection is to be the person who's pushy, like constantly following up, like an inappropriate amount of times. Like that can be an instant no. And yet you might think you're doing the right thing by trying to get them to say yes, you know, but it's the opposite. But we had some great questions come into the chat. So if you want, I can go ahead and I'll go ahead and ask them on camera and we'll get your answer. I'm going to scroll up just a little bit because we had a few come in right at the same time. Just a comment, Rhonda said that she thinks editors and agents sometimes are too nice to send the rejection letter. So like that, a comment on maybe why it takes time to get it in there. And then so this goes right into what I just said. Is there an acceptable length of time when you know for certain you should move on if you've not heard? So Annette, what do you think?
Well, I've read, you know, you have to read the guidelines before you submit. Usually places that you're submitting to have very specific guidelines. And sometimes they'll be nice enough to say, if you haven't heard back from us within 6 months, please just assume that your work was not the right fit for our agency. And when I have seen those little disclaimers, 6 months seems to be the typical. I've seen 3 months a couple of times, but 6 months seems to be that typical line that they feed. Now, I know that it's different from agency to agency and from house to house, you know, but I think that, Bethany, you probably could speak more into that. You have more experience with that end of things. What do you think?
Well, I really liked your answer. I know that if you're wanting so I'm going to apply this from an agent to a publisher, but it can apply for us to an agent or a publisher too. You know, if it's been a while since like your agent's heard back from a publisher, a good thing to do is if you have worked on platform or something amazing has happened in that time frame, giving them a reason to follow up is a good thing. So if you're in that case looking for an agent, if there's like a major award that you've won or your platform has just exploded maybe in one area or with your email list, that might be a reason to follow up. But yeah, I think the 6 months, I've seen a lot of that too. And the guidelines is really the thing. There's really no good answer for this. Sometimes going to conferences virtually or in person, that gives you a chance to follow up with that person again. So sometimes that face-to-face networking can help if it's been a while, because sometimes emails get lost. But you just don't know. That's the thing. You just don't know. So wait and see. But a follow-up email, if it's been enough time, maybe a month to 2 months, it just kind of depends. You know, just a simple, just wanted to make sure it didn't get lost. You know, thank you so much. Never giving them a reason that they need to respond to you. Just something polite is usually pretty good. So I don't know if that really helped.
I think that was helpful. I actually had the benefit of, and I've gotten lots and lots of rejections, like all writers have, for different, you know, things that I've submitted. But I have had the benefit of some big houses with their sending back some really helpful advice on how, you know, which I think is unusual. But in those cases, I think for sure it go ahead and take their advice, because they're, you know, giving it to you for a reason and then resubmitting at that point. But I think if it's just been an incredibly long period of time and you do a follow-up email, I wouldn't continue to do that. I would kind of let it go and move on to the next thing. And that's part of the waiting too. It's just, I think part of what helps the wait is knowing that God has a plan, knowing that God has a specific place, and I really do believe this. I think that there are very varied opinions on this, but I really do believe that God has a home for the work that he gives you, that he'll eventually help you find that home. And so every rejection and every blow off that you get, if you take it from that perspective, then you know, okay, well, this isn't it. God has something else for me. Let's move on. And that helps motivate you to go to the next step. Well, I know it does me. And the first, actually, it was really odd the way that I got my agent. It was the second, and my agent is Kyle from Heartline. The second conference I went to after that first, originating conference, that was like my dream conference. That's will always be my home conference. And so, but the second one I went to was a huge one. It was Blue Ridge, and I went there knowing that I didn't really have anything to submit. I that first night for signups for appointments, I didn't sign up for anything because I was just there to learn. And but after that first night of signups, I went to a class with Jesse Floria from Clubhouse for Kids, or from Focus on the Family. And he did I loved his class about writing for children in their little magazines. And I thought, well, I have a little something that might be really cute for their magazine. And I happen to have it on hand. I'm going to go see if he has any appointments available for that left, because so many of the big guys already are all filled up that there's always appointments to be had. And so I went and looked, and sure enough, I was able to get on his books, and I went and I showed him I had the work with me. I printed it out at the front desk because I hadn't even brought anything with me. And, I said, I just sat through your class, and, had a couple questions about that. And I also wanted to show you this and ask you if you thought it would be good for your magazine. And so he looked at it and he said, oh, this is really good. I think this would be good for the magazine, but I think it'd make a much better children's book. So up until that point, I hadn't really considered children's book. I had just done this cute little story with my daughter because it was an adoption story and she's adopted. And we had watched a Disney nature program, like the weekend before. And she said, Mom, that little monkey was adopted by the monkey troop. And I said, you're right, that's an adoption story in nature that, is a real life adoption story. And so we sat down and we wrote it, and we had fun doing it, and it was a rhyming. And so he said, I think this would be a really good children's book. And I said, oh, okay. And I said, well, I'm not on anybody's appointments, and but I was just here to learn. And so and he said, no, you need to go talk to Kyle Young. And I said, but I'm not on his appointments, and he is one of the ones who's filled up, right away. And he said, Kyle, and so it was right during lunchtime, and this is God's timing, and that's why I'm going over this. When it's time, it's time. The Bible talks all the time, throughout Scripture, Old and New Testament, about the fullness of time, and when the time came. And there's stories throughout Scripture about people waiting till that perfect time that God has appointed. And so Kyle happened to not have anybody there. He happened to be willing to look at my stuff. He looked at my jumbled paperwork. I didn't have anything together. And he said, yeah, this is really good. Why don't you get in touch with me? And so I went there on I went home on cloud nine thinking I'll probably never hear anything back from this, but it was neat to be able to see God's hand at work. But then he wound up, signing me, shortly thereafter. And so that little story, the Jack the Macaque story, is what kind of started everything and kind of got my foot in the door. And yet that's the story that's still waiting. It's still being shopped. I've still tweaked it and updated it and worked with it. And we thought for sure, that it would be picked up right away. But the publishing houses have certain things and certain trends. And the adoption story trend, I guess, I came right on the tail end of that. And so they weren't picking up a lot of adoption story type manuscripts. And so I still believe that it might come around, but it was that got me in the door. So if you're in a waiting period and you have a work submitted out there that you've waited for a really, really long time? I mean, this one has been out there for 4 years, and I have done some updates to it, and I believe that it will have its time, but it's just not now. So if you are in that boat and you have had something out there for a long time, don't stop with that. Go, and you don't have to wait for one thing to come to fruition before you start other things. And so it was because of Jack the Macaque also that it was submitted to one publisher who got back with Kyle and said, we really like this author's writing, but this is not the right story for us at this time. Does she have anything else? Well, when I got that message back, I thought, I don't really have anything else. And this was early on. And so I went and I looked at their website. I looked at the kind of books they had out there, and what kind of books they, and so I had this list of criteria in my mind. All right, they like ABC books. They like kind of brainy books that are very educational. They like rhyming books, and they like, So from that, I came up with What is a Family, and I submitted it to them, and they contracted it. And so it's just taking those opportunities without letting the rejections and the seeming failures stop you in your tracks. You have to keep going past that. And so that's another example of waiting. I'm still waiting for Jack the Macaque, but I've learned a lot, and God has done a lot in between, that time that I submitted and now.
Yeah, I say I related a lot to the waiting period when it comes to the books and the unexpected things that God brought about. I too got on with Kyle and Heartline, and I remember beforehand when I was searching for an agent and I had my book that I was chopping around, I thought, I've got to focus all of my efforts on this. And I had other friends who were writing and saying, you need to write the next book. You need to write the next book. Get that other one up there. And I thought, I really headbutted with that idea, that next book. But the more it was hammered, the more it was like God was pushing towards that. And so I did. And then after I got on with Kyle, he's like, we can get you on with this publisher, but you need to have 3 books. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 2. But those appointments, it's just cool when you see him work and you realize all along he was taking me on that road. And so, yeah, it's awesome to hear your story.
Bethany had mentioned platform too. Platform probably has been my hardest, my most challenging struggle, because I am an introvert, and I think a lot of writers are introverts. And so when I think of, and like I've heard her testimony as far as platform goes too, and building your identity on social media. And prior to that, I was just very resistant to social media in general. I still am very wary of it. My husband and I watched a program called The Social Dilemma. Oh my gosh, on Netflix. Don't watch that if you ever want to be on social media again, because they take people who have left all of the big social, anyway, I won't go into that. But I have been but I've learned so much through Platinum Lit, through Bethany and Michelle, that I had to change my thinking about social media to really, as it being a tool to reach people, to reach your audience, to connect with people in real ways, to find out real needs. So I had to switch my thinking about, okay, marketing using people kind of mentality, which is what made me resistant to that, to okay, ministry kind of, what do people want? What do they need? What are the felt needs out there? And then really trying to give myself a way to help fill those needs. And so as I'm learning more about that too, it ties into the waiting, because I don't think I ever considered I've been in children's ministry for a long time, and I have done some things in ladies ministry, but I didn't really consider myself, that's where God wanted to connect me. But I'm finding out more and more that he's opening up doors for that through the platform building and through the social media stuff. So that is a huge thing that needs to occur during during that wait time is you have to find your people. You have to find your readers. You know, you can write all the stories in the world, but if nobody is there to read them, what difference does it make? If you're not meeting a felt need, or if you're not connecting with people in real ways, what, you know, I'm all about purpose. The things in my life that are just don't have a purpose, I can't put myself into those things fully. And there are things that everybody has to do that are just have to be done. But the things that contain real purpose are the things that I'm driven to succeed at, because I know that in the end, I'm accomplishing something for a greater good. And so building the platform, I'm starting to see more and more that that really your platform, it does help your career, and it does help you. Publishers look at you differently, those numbers do for sure. But the real motivation behind building a platform should be to connect with people in a way that you can help, that God can use you to help meet those felt needs for those people. And those who are your real audience. And those most likely are who God wants you to write for. And so, so that's another thing that I have learned during this waiting period, and how God's kind of changed my heart and my mind during those things. There's these lists of things that an author is supposed to do to make themselves more marketable. But if you look at the deeper things behind those things, it's not just a list of things. God is using those things to help you become who he's called you to be. And so that's another lesson that I've learned, and I'm still learning in that respect as well.
Absolutely. Jill's question. How do you help your family understand the wait times, and do you have advice on, you know, how to deal with friends and family, and because they're part of this with us?
That is such a good question. I could not even tell you. I almost dread visiting my mother-in-law before my book came out, especially. Okay, so Familius contracted my first children's book at the end of 2017. And it did not come out until July of this year. And there were a couple of delays in, you know, at the beginning of the year. It was supposed to come out sooner, but because of COVID, it was pushed back. And so every time I see that dear woman, every time I speak to her on the phone, for the past 4 years until my book came out, she was like, so what's going on with your book? It's still coming out, isn't it? You know, friends and family just don't understand the time that it takes. And I almost felt defensive there at the end. I told my husband, please tell your mom not to ask me about my book anymore, okay? But since it came out, she has been my biggest fan. I mean, she has, oh my gosh, she has put that book in the hands of people, and she's very politically involved. So, you know, I have pictures of people, you know, anyway, she has been my biggest fan. But it is very hard. So I think the way is just be upfront with friends and family and say, you know, at the very beginning, it's going to take a long time. I'm frustrated by the fact it's going to take a long time too. I don't mind you asking, but it's probably going to be the same answer. And I promise you'll be the first to know when something moves on that. I promise. And so, and of course I did tell my mother-in-law that, but she's a little bit forgetful. So, you know, she, every time. But I think the way to handle friends and family and helping them understand the wait time is just explaining, giving them a brief synopsis of the industry and letting them know that that's the norm, that, you know, you're not being picked on, you're not being, you know, if somebody's not giving you the raw deal, and because I think they want to stick up for you and say, hey, that's ridiculous that it's taking so long, I'm going to call somebody, you know. So they just need to know that that's the norm. Because with self-publishing out there, especially, people, you know, can publish a lot more quickly. And as a result of that, people think, well, look how quickly this book was published. What's wrong with these publishers? Why can't they get them out like that? Kind of thing. And they just don't understand the industry. It takes us a long time to understand the industry. So we need to have grace with our friends and family who don't, and just give them the information very gently, and just be glad that they're rooting for you, and be glad that they're on your side and want that to come to fruition for you as well.
Yeah, lots of great chat happening too about this topic. A lot of people saying that they agree, and a lot of wisdom in some of the comments that are here. And Rhonda said something interesting. She said that sometimes the questioning can lead to shame if she lets it. And so that's great advice, just explaining how the industry works too. And Jill said a lot of people have asked why she doesn't just self-publish. And I think with the COVID delays too, I think we might have maybe some people who are traditional decide to go ahead and self-publish if time is important for the book. Sometimes the timeline can be a pro for self-publishing, where you would take some of the pros for traditional. They kind of move down your priority list. I think every book is different. You really have to decide for each book what the right path is, and then look at it in a career, macro and micro levels.
Definitely. And I don't know if the question was more along those lines, or along the lines of, your family sees you investing all of this time into writing, into building your platform, into your craft. How do you explain to them that something that seems to not be paying off at the moment is still worth pursuing at the time? And I have run into that too, not overtly. I have a really good support team, but my children especially are like, Mom, are you serious? This book, Jack McCack, has been around for a while. Why don't they don't understand. And so I think God gives us the grace that we need to handle the weight, but he doesn't necessarily give grace to those who are cheering us on. And so you just have to come at it. I've come at it from the perspective of, this is like going through a course of study. This is like going through, 4 years of college, and you don't see that payoff until a lot later. And anything worthwhile, and this is what I tell my kids, anything worthwhile is not going to be easy, and it's going to take time. And so we live in such a society of instant gratification that it's becoming harder and harder for people to understand that. But it's true. It's true, in every realm, I think, and especially this one.
I love that. All right. Any more questions in the chat, or if we missed one, please throw it in there so we can make sure to get it on the recording. I'm just going to read some comments. Rhonda said she uses a baseball analogy sometimes. She's swinging for the fences in the major league. I love that. Takes time and effort to get there, and few people actually make it. And if we talk about the bestseller list, that's absolutely true. It's a very small number of people who make it there. Tina said, we're each building a brand from scratch. Absolutely. How long did it take Nike to become successful? I love that, because Google is number one? I don't know, number one search engine. But when they started in those early years, they were number 28 or 23. I don't remember. It took them time to build to the point where they are who they are now. I mean, Google's a verb. They own YouTube. I love going back and reading the stories of the people who really just put in that time, and that overnight success is such a myth. It's so many hours, and we're all putting that in there. I love that. Jill did mention she's been questioned a lot about it. She's new to writing full time, quit her job, her husband retired, and many people should feel like should be working, in quotes. And I think we probably all felt that, because writing industry is, it can be difficult to earn a full-time living as a writer. A lot of people think if you sell a book, you're making a lot of money, but there's a whole lot of money that goes into marketing that book, or launching the book, or if you're self-publishing, investing in the book. Sometimes you're upside down for a while with the project, just depending on what you're choosing to do. And a lot of people don't understand. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the publishing industry from people who aren't writers at all. So any thoughts on that, anybody?
I know I sure did. As many years as I've been at it, I've had family members who, run the gamut of all those questions, the ones that are constantly asking, when are you going to be published? When are you going to be published? And others that are, they got that look in their face. It's like, yeah, I think it's just a hobby for you rather than an actual profession that you're pursuing. And you're like, you want to justify yourself, but you don't know how to come at it, or if you even should.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I definitely agree. Have you ever experienced that need to self-justify that this is not a hobby, I'm really investing in myself, Annette?
Definitely. And then, one of the people in the chat said, you have that guilt or the shame and I think the imposter syndrome, that is really strong too, to think, if it's taking this long, maybe I'm just a fake. Maybe this is just something I've cooked up. And I think that all goes back to, I will say I had one particular aunt who has very good intentions, but can sometimes be very sharp with her words. And so I finally had to tell her, and this is anyway, I finally had to tell her, I know God has me doing this for a reason, and I don't know what he's going to do with it, but I know that I have to do it because he's called me to. And that was enough. She never asked me again. And so I think a lot of times we need to let God be our daddy who can protect us. And if we truly feel called, we need to fall back on that calling and let him be our defender in that. I think that, if you think it's taking too long, take it up with God. If he wants to move it along quicker, I'm all for that. And so I'm doing my part that I know that he's calling me to do. And the rest is his timing in that fullness of time. And so there's very few arguments that can happen against that. and if there are, they need to take it up, that argument, with God. And so but I think for most of the part, we can just treat our friends and family with grace, and just in knowing how frustrating it is for them to see us working so hard and really not seeing our dreams fulfilled in the way that they know we want them to, and kind of being on our side for that, taking up an offense for us in that respect and wanting the best for us. I think that we can just have grace with them and say, I'm fine with it. I know this is part of the industry. You be fine with it too, and move on. And so, and just trust it. If God, that's what God has you doing, that he has you doing it for a purpose. His purpose and plans are perfect. And so even when you stop depending on yourself, stop hoping and trusting in yourself, you can fall back on that calling, because his calling and his gifts are without repentance, and he will see those through. And as long as I am staying in tune with him and doing each step that I know he's calling me to do, then I can just trust that whatever happens, it's going to be good, because his plans are good.
I love that. And there's also some great comments happening in the chat over here too. So we'll make sure to try to get this saved with the recording. Really great things. And what's interesting as I'm kind of just scrolling through and reading them is there seems to be a common element amongst most of us in this group, which is why I think this group is so special, that the monetary portion of this, while it's important to take care of our families and to make money with our gifts, it doesn't seem to be the reason why. It's nobody's why. It's like, okay, yeah, we're upside down maybe in this when we think about it, but the purpose, the reason that we write is so much bigger than the financial side of it. And that's kind of what I'm seeing happen in the chat right now. People agreeing. Okay, so we're getting close to 12. So Annette, I'm gonna ask you any other pieces of advice that you want to give, and then we will let people who want to come on video for the last part of the recording, you can come on with us. So Annette, anything else to add before everybody comes in?
I think I've covered everything that I can think of. And like I said, it's a lifelong learning journey for me on this. But I think it just all goes back to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. And so clearly, I have seen his hand plow that path in front of me when I've been willing to hear and listen and lean and trust. And so waiting, I think, has a lot to do with trust, and it has a lot to do with hope. We can be peaceful in our waiting when we trust that God is at work, even when we have to be still. And so I think that kind of encompasses everything that I've said before, but kind of bringing it home.
I love that. And thank you so much. This was so good. I'm excited to write today. Okay, so anybody who would like to come on for the last little bit and be on video on the recording, go ahead and come in and let us know if you need help starting your video. And then in about 12 minutes, 13 minutes, we will go off the recording. So if you're waiting for then, you can come on after the recording too if you don't want to be on camera now, or that's totally fine. So, okay, we'll just go ahead and open the floor. If anyone's got questions or comments for Annette, go for it.
This has just been really super encouraging, Annette. Thank you for sharing, and especially when it seems like monkey wrenches have been thrown in your process. It's really just God getting us to be still, and He's got something else He wants us to learn in the process. So it was really encouraging to my heart to hear you today.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad that God can use the lessons in my life when I talk about what He's done through them to help other people. So that's exciting. Thank you.
I will say, Annette, I agree with Norma. I don't know about anybody else, but I really needed this today. You know, and one of the things I realize is there are circles of people in my life. You know, there's the universe. Then there's my tribe, the people who might read my book. Then there's my friends and my family. But really, on the inside, the core of people I listen to are other writers. And that's one of the reasons I'm here as often as I can be on Writers Chat, and why I'm emailing my critique group and not just sending them my submissions, but emailing them for encouragement and support, because no one understands us like other writers. And we are a different breed. The calling that we are called to is not an easy one. And people who think, oh, you just sit down and make up stuff all day, they just don't understand, you know, how it's going. And I try to remember that when they can be, you know, I have a couple of friends especially, when can I read your book? When can I read your book? When is your book coming out? And every time they ask, something inside of me just cringes. And I need to remember, you know, it's not like this just for me. I'm not being picked on. This is the way the industry is. And if they don't understand, that's just too bad. And so I'll deflect it with humor, or I'll say, hey, I'll send you the PDF. You really want to read it. You know, just finding some way to relieve the pressure. So thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so then why don't we go ahead and we'll just have an early after party. So this was amazing. I thought this was so good, and I don't know, I feel very encouraged. I think that just seems to be the word that keeps kind of popping up in my mind. Like, sometimes it feels very lonely, like you're the only one waiting, and like, but we're all waiting at some point, you know, for some things. So I love that. And Annette, so good to see you, my friend. It was so good to have you on here. Thank you for sharing your story.
You. I've missed our conferences, our meetings at normal conferences. So this has been nice to be able to chat with everyone and kind of, this is our clan. We understand each other more than would. It really is a special bond I think writers have with each other. So it's been fun.
It's been great. All right, so stay on if you want to for our after party. We'll go ahead and say goodbye to people watching the replay. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you next week.